FittonBooks.com presents 1963 by Robert P. Fitton. Read by the author. Copyright 2014 by the Robert P. Fitton Revocable Trust. The darkest places in hell are reserved for those who maintain their neutrality in times of moral crises. Dante Alighieri, Italian national epic poet, 1265 to 1321. Author's note. Let us connect the dots. This is an unusual science fiction time travel novel that collides with the real Lee Oswald and his activities preceding the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It is my hope that this novel will be a gateway to all aspects of the complex scenario that produced the death of President Kennedy. Rather than rely on official stories and character destruction, 1963 refers to validated events. I am not a researcher. This footnoted work is written on the shoulders of countless investigators who year after year search for the truth in the face of relentless criticism, humiliation, and the weight of government obfuscation. This book is not intended for those who experienced the horrific events in Dallas in November 1963, nor is it an encyclopedia. The weaving together of the conspiracy is presented to those not yet born when Kennedy died. Contained within is a sample connecting pertinent facts in the latter part of 1963. The truth remains alive because witnesses made courageous choices, as President Kennedy would have admired, to speak up in the face of threat, danger, and loss of position. Like President Kennedy, dozens of these men and women were murdered. As a time travel author, I am in awe of how history became remarkably altered by the murderers and those complicit in aiding, abetting, and fomenting the plot on President Kennedy's life. Subsequently, the dogged, pervasive, and mostly ruthless cover-up effort persists 50 years later. The United States was founded as a republic with representative government. Lincoln so eloquently stated that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. To capture these ideals, this nation needs the truth of just how that government derailed and failed to become a government of the people in 1963. Only then will we have another new birth of freedom and establish justice for President Kennedy. Robert P. Fitton, January 20th, 2014. This is a true story. It is known to the police department of one of our largest cities as the most difficult homicide case in its experience, principally because of the diabolical cleverness, intelligence, and cunning of a completely unknown killer. The record is set down here factually, as it happened. Only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Opening sequence, He Walked by Night, Eagle Lion Films, November 24th, 1948. Johnny Rosselli, associate producer. For President Kennedy. Chapter 1. Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas, Sunday, January 13th, 2013, 11:22 a.m. Rewriting history carries an expensive price tag. For years, Patch Kincaid had relived John Kennedy's assassination behind a fold-away aluminum table in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. The locals knew him as the eccentric, bearded fool who once claimed he caused Kennedy's death in 1963. Little kids would then add up the years from 1963 to 2013 on their fingers. Then inevitably someone would proclaim him a liar. Nobody really cared now about what happened half a century past on the street below. Patch did not involve himself in conspiracy theories or what-ifs about JFK. Across his tabletop were the books and DVDs celebrating the career of John F. Kennedy. At times he would play some of Kennedy's speeches, docked through his MP3 player into the humongous gray boombox below the table. Just last week, 3 Dallas policemen threatened to have him arrested as JFK's voice, teeming with optimism, told the world why the United States chose to go to the moon. During the last few days, the unusually cold temperatures prompted him to close down his table and take a break on the front steps of the museum. He gazed up at the sandstone brick building, once called the Texas School Book Depository Building, where the loner, Lee Harvey Oswald, shot Kennedy from the corner 6th floor window on November 22, 1963. On the day of the assassination, a huge Hertz rent-a-car sign on the roof displayed the time in white digits. Patch had no reason to question what Earl Warren and his distinguished commission members had written in 26 volumes so many years ago. In his old timeline, he remembered Kennedy being alive in 1986. He understood that he had warped history's fabric because he traveled back to 1961 and returned to 2003. The traffic ebbed and flowed in a fluctuating buzz along Elm Street. From the museum's stone steps, he checked the triple underpass ahead and the stockade fence to his right, atop the knoll, and then he panned down Houston Street to his left. Over the past few weeks, he had seen men watching him from numerous locations. 2 intelligence operatives had warned him 3 months ago to mind his own business and leave Dallas permanently. Even his friend Herman grew nervous. Herman's straggly steel hair and deep-set, spooky brown eyes gave him the look of a madman. In his denim jacket, he led a group of young students in the cold air toward the museum. Patch smiled as Herman recited in a gritty voice from memory the words on the plaque outside the building. Formerly the Texas School Book Depository, this site was originally owned by John Neely Bryan, the founder of Dallas. During the 1880s, French native Maximin Gilliot operated a wagon shop here. In 1884, the land was purchased by Phil L. Mitchell, president and director of the Rock Island Plow Company of Illinois. An office building for the firm's Texas division, known as the Southern Rock Plow Company, was completed here 4 years later. In 1901, the 5-story structure was destroyed by fire. That same year, under the supervision of the company's vice president and general manager, F.B. Jones, work was completed on this structure, built to resemble an earlier edifice. It features characteristics of the Romanesque revival style. In 1937, the Caraway Bird Corporation purchased the property. Under the direction of D.H. Bird, the building was leased to a variety of businesses, including the Texas School Book Depository. On November 22, 1963, the building gained notoriety when Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly shot and killed President John F. Kennedy from a 6th-floor window as the presidential motorcade passed this site. Herman brought the group around the corner on Houston Street near the traffic light. The next caravan of cars and a couple of small trucks moved away from the light. In 1966, physicist Richard Wyman was asked by a researcher to study all aspects of the shooting directly in the plaza before you. Dr. Wyman did determine that the final headshot was a slight movement forward and then a violent backward thrust. This was an all-in-one dynamic. Patch scrolled down his MP3 player's glowing screen to Kennedy's Berlin speech in June of 1963, the president's most inspiring speech. Patch squinted, and his eyes watered as he faced the oncoming breeze. Not many people were in the plaza today. Random snow pellets accompanied the northern air, and low, hanging gray clouds transformed the plaza into a chilled mausoleum. He pushed his thumb on the highlight screen, and JFK's voice broke through time from 1963. He mouthed the words, "I am proud to come to this city as the guest of your distinguished mayor, who has symbolized throughout the world the fighting spirit of West Berlin." A pudgy young man and his bleach blonde wife looked up the knoll at Patch. The man zipped up his blue Chicago Bears jacket. Patch stroked his beard. At least he had gotten their attention. Mr. Chicago pointed at the concrete pedestal where Abraham Zapruder had filmed the assassination with an 8mm Bell & Howell Model 414 PD Direct-to-Series camera operated by a spring mechanism. Then they climbed toward Patch. "Hey, how come Kennedy flew backward if he was shot from behind?" asked Mr. Chicago in a gruff voice. His dark beard bristles blanketed his round chin, and the remnants of whatever he drank for lunch lingered in the air. The woman kept her hands inside her blue nylon windbreaker. She spoke in a squeaky voice. "Ed likes straight answers." "I'm here to celebrate the life of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Listen," he turned up the volume. 2,000 years ago, the proudest voice was Kyrus Romanus Sum. Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is Ich bin ein Berliner. Yeah, that's great, but the CIA had JFK knocked off, said Mr. Chicago, pretending his finger was a gun. Isn't it more important we understand what he accomplished? Asked Patch. We saw that at the Kennedy Library up in Boston. Those people had no friggin' idea who killed JFK, Dolores. He's still dead either way, replied Patch. A cocky Mr. Chicago turned toward Elm Street. So, this is where they nailed him. He thrust his index finger upward toward the knoll and the wooden stockade fence next to the curved white pergola. The shots came from the grassy knoll, Dolores. To me, that makes more sense. Most of the people in the plaza that day ran up to the grassy knoll. Patch showed him Kennedy in Ireland on the cover of a CD. I can get you all of Kennedy's speeches for $9.99. Mr. Chicago just kept walking as Dolores shrugged her shoulders. Then he performed an odd alignment with his thumb and forefingers behind the fence. Patch had seen the machinations before. People always emerged from behind the fence, proclaiming the easy shot to the street below. It was a piece of cake, Dolores. A hefty woman with feathered, sharp white hair walked upright in a white sweater and cream-colored pantsuit along the grass toward Patch's table. He sensed her scented perfume as she approached. She had a genuine smile and chestnut eyes, and her smooth voice indicated kindness and sensitivity. We all loved Jack Kennedy. Goosebumps covered Patch's arms under his jacket sleeves. Most people coming through here now were not alive back then. Like you? She asked, followed by a quick laugh. Right, where are you from? Originally from the Northwest, but now I live in West Palm Beach. I swore I'd never come down here to see where it happened. She saw him sniffing the air. It's called Honeysuckle by Avon. I wondered. First came out 50 years ago. What's your name? Patch Kincaid. Cabbage Patch. Patch grinned at the humor. Then his face resumed its Dealey Plaza solemnity. Her brown eyes suddenly glazed. We watched for 4 days on TV. This country was on the rise, and Jack Kennedy was a leader. We don't have leaders anymore, Patch. She wore no ring and extended her hand. My name is Sharon Gorman, one of my names. I've been married one too many times. She looked over her shoulder toward the sixth-floor window. Kind of eerie, isn't it? Have you ever been in the museum, Mrs. Gorman? I walked through the sixth floor very quickly. Why is that? She produced an incredulous expression. Let me tell you something, and listen good. Oswald was innocent. I never really looked into it. I'm down here to promote Kennedy's life. There were other plots against Kennedy. There's a saying, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, and third time, it's enemy action. "Who said that?" asked Patch. "Someday you'll read it and think of me." She held his wrist and stared into his eyes with an intensity that made him uneasy. "I'm finding it difficult to go down there." "Do you want me to walk down there with you?" Tears slowly descended over the well-embedded smile lines as she nodded. She removed a tissue and patted her eyes. "You don't know what this did to my generation. You never get over it." Patch pinched the brim of his Aussie hat and zipped his faded army jacket. It was too damn cold to be selling anything out here today. He squinted into the January glare, crossed the triple underpass toward the Stemmons Freeway. With a single jab, he pushed the on button for Kennedy's Berlin speech. Her head darted to the left, and she smiled. Then she clutched onto Patch's extended arm, and they took short steps down the cold Elm Street sidewalk. Her face assumed a new excitement with the president's words in the background, and her soft scent followed them to the street. With just Kennedy's speech breaking the lonely silence in Dealey Plaza, their conversation disappeared. All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin, and therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner. Her glassy eyes gravitated away from the asphalt X and toward the railroad bridge's weathered concrete. The cloud-smeared sun cast a dreamy glow over the shadows on the sidewalk under the lofty Union Tower overlooking the plaza. A few more people snooped around the stockade fence atop the knoll. "I'll tell you what they said about those people who visited the Nazi concentration camps at the end of World War II, said Patch softly. "Like tourists in hell, they took pictures. Sometimes I feel the same way about Dealey Plaza." He looked over his shoulder to the central pergola where Zapruder's secretary had steadied him on the concrete riser. Zapruder had panned his movie camera toward the motorcade as it proceeded down Elm Street. Patch winced when he visualized Kennedy's head blowing apart on that sunny November day in 1963. He had only viewed the film once, and that was enough. They shuffled onto Elm Street's smooth pavement. She remained remarkably composed when they reached the spot where the fatal shot hit Kennedy. Her little nose and wide cheeks formed a firm facade. Her dark eyes were fixed to the pavement. She shook her head and then looked up at him. "We must find the truth, Patch." She released his arm and smiled. Then she checked the road and walked with her head up toward the open grass stretch back toward Main Street. Like a soldier parading across a battlefield, she passed under the rippling American flag above the pergola along Houston Street. Then she entered the crosswalk and was gone. Patch eyed the sandstone facade's sixth-floor window. When he worked at the museum, his job involved steering patrons over to the plexiglass cubicle surrounding the stack of cardboard boxes that partially obscured the infamous window. The Army psychiatrist told his friends that his working at the museum would help him shed the responsibility for Kennedy's death after traveling back in time. Yet he remained confused as to how his association with the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, the Cuban rebels, and specifically Carlos Sanchez's death, had prompted a lone gunman to shoot the president. He focused on the building's concrete-framed entry, and then he peered through the twisted oak branches along the quiet side street that led toward the knoll and a parking area adjacent to the rail yard. Every time a train passed, the rumbling cars and the lonesome whistle hearkened him back 50 years. The conspiracy buffs had men shooting from catch basins, from cars in the motorcade, or an umbrella firing, and even from surrounding buildings. And they assigned blame to every possible person or group. Now he was condemned to impart the life of JFK to those who would listen. A new history now existed since his time travel journey. Ray Minkowitz, who had formulated the time travel theories into a working embarking chamber, had long since retired in Florida. Minkowitz would never receive the recognition for pioneering the time dilation experiments. The government had it all locked away in the National Archives warehouse in New Mexico. They lied to Kate about his death, and she married someone else. From a distance, he had seen her family years ago. Now he floated in a comfortable limbo. He waved at Herman. His drifter friend, a Dealey Plaza tourist guide, had once made $500 off tourists one day last summer. Herman, like the lady who had just disappeared beyond the crosswalk on Houston Street, did not think Oswald killed Kennedy. Patch did not want to listen to another conspiracy theory. From the corner of Houston and Elm at the traffic light, his lanky buddy, clad in a denim jacket, returned the wave. Near the stockade fence, a mustache man, probably in his 30s, in a dark sports coat and a white turtleneck, walked briskly from the parking lot behind the knoll. Patch had a creepy suspicion about this guy and had seen the man spying on him. The man continued up the hill to the concrete triple underpass. On November 22, 1963, railway workers awaited the arrival of President and Mrs. Kennedy along those railroad tracks. The mustache man caught up with him as he leaned on the concrete bridge abutment. Dealey Plaza. Patch did not acknowledge him. Kennedy died here, right? Patch stared into his serious dark eyes. X marks the spot, my friend. Pointed at the asphalt down Elm Street. Right here. Kind of sick, isn't it? Not really. Sometimes it's important to mark moments in time. If you don't do that, you won't know who did what and when. I used to work in the museum. President Kennedy, said Patch as he gazed up to the sixth-floor window. President Kennedy was shot by a single gunman from that corner window. The man, younger than Patch, smiled a quick smile. Listen, Patch, how do you know my name? There have been people watching me here for 2 weeks, and you're one of them. My name is Nick Tobias. You probably saw me lurking around here, watching you. I'm aware of your background. Could you show me around and tell me about the assassination? You have me wrong. I'm down here to promote the life of John F. Kennedy, not to speculate on wild conspiracy theories. Then we'll talk about Jack Kennedy. He motioned Patch back along the stockade fence toward the pavilion. I work on my own, but I have contacts with many people. Patch squinted as they walked toward the fence, and he studied the man's chiseled face. Conspiracy theorists believe there were shooters right here behind this stockade fence, among other locations. The Warren Commission fully established that a single bullet passed through President Kennedy and Governor Connally, and that a final shot came from the sixth-floor window that destroyed the president's skull. It never should have happened. He walked ahead of Nick back to his table near the Kerr Pavilion. You feel that because of your time travel in 1961, President Kennedy died, Nick shouted from behind. It's not your fault, Patch. Patch spun from in front of his table. I don't know what you know, Nick, but he was alive before I went back in time, in 1986. I know the specifics of Hastings Mountain and the time dilation and the other timeline. He looked closer at Nick's dark eyes. How? That I cannot reveal. The government wants me to stop talking about Kennedy and leave Dealey Plaza. I've come down here to Texas to speak about time travel, the time dilation experiments. Patch's eyes intensified as a burst of cold air lifted up like a ghost from Elm Street. He motioned Nick around the back of the pavilion. The red sandstone facade of the museum loomed overhead. To his left, the parking lot opened behind the stockade fence. Patch bit his lower lip. Starting the time dilation experiments is quite impossible. All the files on time dilation are also classified. Doesn't matter. Who's behind this? I can't comment on that right now. Well, bullshit. You won't tell me how you know anything? That would not be smart. Then we have nothing to say, Nick. He walked silently back to his table. Kennedy's speech had ended. Traffic accelerated past the green light and flowed freely over the roadway. Even in the cloudy weather, Nick's shadow shaded the table. His square shoulders and large frame formed a blackened behemoth against the fuzzy clouds. Patch shook his head. Sometimes he thought he saw something move in the sixth-floor window. More than likely, the interior images of museum patrons passed by the window. With his brow cut deep into his forehead, he faced Nick. My job was to kill Carlos Sanchez. Mankiewicz shot him, and that caused the lone nut Oswald to shoot Kennedy. Don't ask me how that happened. We need you to stop them from traveling back in time. Who is them, Nick? I would rather not say. Patch put his arm behind Nick, and they walked under the scraggly oaks back to the museum. Herman, his breath foggy, lectured a little guy on the pergola's sidewalk. Patch stopped on the old schoolbook depository steps. I want to meet your contact. That isn't possible. Even after 50 years, Patch, this thing is still very hot. Let me be more specific. My contact is aware that a certain individual has stolen the time dilation information from New Mexico. He knows the location of the new embarkation chamber, and that facility is nearly operational due to the efforts of this man. Patch stroked his beard. Why do you need me? Nick smiled for the first time and panned to the sixth-floor window. Patch, I can't tell you that right now. I risk getting other people involved. Then more people have been watching me. Yes. Many times Patch had tried to envision the world as it once existed, with Kennedy alive in 1986. If you could send me back to 1963, I would indeed prevent what happened here. Yes, sir. I'd step into the street and stop the damn motorcade. Nick looked into his eyes for the longest time. I cannot guarantee that I can send you back to 1963, Patch. Will you help us? Patch stared at the worn X on the asphalt and pressed his lips. The cold air stung his face. Then he faced Nick. I'll think about it. Chapter 3. Patch lay back on his narrow mattress. The incessant dribbling of the basketball kept him awake as he followed the players running up and down the court on the little flat-screen TV. As the thermometer hovered around freezing, the outside drizzle sent a cool breeze through the open window. He turned the knob in the old quartz heater. In a few seconds, the elongated coils glowed red with the expanding heat. Several beeps sounded on his laptop. The flashing blue icon on the toolbar indicated someone had summoned him on Skype. He rolled across the mattress and clicked the icon. Seeing the name Retrograde 4572 made him suspicious. You're a pain in the ass, McCabe, if it's you. Who else would talk about time dilation retrograde? A light blue rectangular box popped up on the screen. Retrograde 4572 is requesting connection. He crunched his brow and accepted the request. A twirling inner circle soon materialized into a man with straight-peppered hair and narrow slits for eyes. He had a strong but raspy voice and a square jaw. He opened his milky eyes.
Kincaid?
Who the hell are you?
Someone with answers to your problem.
My problem? Patch swung his legs under the table.
Another chance.
Listen, I haven't got time for bullshit. The man raised his left brow and then his blue eyes opened wide.
I need your help.
I have no idea who you are or what you're talking about. He clicked off the icon, but he wondered if he had just clicked off the wacky Dr. Alexander Moon, described by McCabe. He needs my help. For what? Patch fell back on the quilted comforter and fluffed his pillows. He shut down the laptop so only the TV monitor light covered him. Car lights sporadically passed, and taillights brightened at the corner stop sign. The crispy tree leaves occasionally fluttered in the night. With his thumb using the remote, he changed the channel from the basketball game. As he flipped by old black and white movies, a documentary on condor birds, and worldwide wrestling, he questioned why so many people were after him right now. Duplicating Mankiewicz's work on the other timeline appeared unlikely. Mankiewicz's original notes from the 1950s and 60s in the present timeline, locked in the New Mexico warehouse, would have to be studied and verified. An enormous amount of money would be necessary to build an embarking chamber, similar to Sector 13 inside Hastings Mountain. How would any private group or even a brilliant scientist bring in the proper technicians to maintain and implement time travel programs? He pushed off the remote and climbed under the covers. The phosphorescent TV screen image dissipated on the screen, and only the car lights passed along the wall. Patch closed his eyes. He shook his head from side to side on the pillow. Why did Kennedy have to die anyways? Why did Kate have to marry somebody else? Why had he risked going back in time? Once the TV timer shut off, he drifted into a light sleep. Then his cell phone's high-pitched ring broke the silence. His body demanded rest. He kept his eyes shut as he reached for the phone. Yeah.
Mr. Kincaid, my name is Kwang. I am part of Dr. Moon's contingent, formed to travel back in time. A contingent based on your debriefing in 2003.
Right. He pushed off the phone and turned over on the pillow. But the line rang again. He hit the send button.
We want you to travel back in time, Captain, and prevent Kennedy from being killed.
You're lying. Patch sat up in the dark. You don't need me, Kwang, to accomplish that.
No, Mr. Kincaid, we have a problem. You know the scientific aspects of time dilation.
Like I'm going to help you.
Also, you are the only one with the actual knowledge of what happened. You have met many of the major players. You can simply prevent Kennedy from being killed.
You mean not let him go to Dallas?
Dallas, Tampa, Chicago. There were many cities where he was going to be killed.
Oswald killed JFK in Dallas, Texas. Case closed. Don't start the conspiracy crap.
There's more to this.
Come on. Patch pinched the bridge of his nose. Get somebody else, Kwang. I think you're lying, trying to lure me into something else. And just remember, time is much too fragile to be messing with it. He clicked off the cell and threw it onto the comforter. Then he pounded the pillow with his closed fist. These people had no idea about the dangers of time travel. The exhaust leaking through the window opening awakened him. He sniffed the air and sat up. 2 red taillights glowed between the hedge branches outside. The low pitch of a reverberating car engine shook the window glass. He crawled out of bed and then, like a dog, placing his paws on the windowsill, he peered into the yard. 2 shadowy figures stood at the corner, just out of range of the streetlight. Something hit the ground with a thud near the garage. Now he wished he had a weapon. These people would pressure him until he forced them to quit. Patch quickly punched 911 into his cell.
Dallas Police Dispatcher.
I have 2 men around my house, breaking and entering.
What's your address, sir?
435 East Central. My name is Robert G. Kincaid.
They're there right now?
The corner of East and 14th.
Sir, stay in your house. We're sending officers to the scene right now.
Patch pushed off the cell button. He slipped on his sweatpants and grabbed the wooden baseball bat he kept in the corner. Anger surged within him as he tore through the living room. Hunched over, he stepped through the kitchen and slowly opened the back door. In the icy rain, he circled the rear of the garage and rounded the edge. A lanky man in a hooded yellow slicker held a revolver near the driveway. He straightened up behind the drain pipe and tightened his grip on the bat as the guy inched closer. In a single swipe, he let loose with a mighty swing into the guy's ribs. The man buckled over in pain and his gun flipped into the air. Patch cocked the bat again and this time smacked his cheekbone, sending him to the grass. He easily found the metal revolver and ran parallel to the house along the bedroom. Mist built up on his skin. A middle-aged Asian man in a gray sweatshirt and an older white-haired man, also Asian, in a trench coat, stood across the street. Patch crossed the lawn and hid behind the neighbor's Jeep. He wiped the water droplets off his forehead. The 2 men stood less than 25 feet away from a gray BMW, headlights projecting across the light rain as the car idled on the sidewalk. Still in the shadows, he crawled on his belly across the wet lawn. Now he heard their conversation. "Where the hell is he, June?" asked the older man. "Give him a few minutes to get Kincaid out, Kwang." Patch ran his finger along the trigger. To his right, the guy from the back of the house, his face bloody, staggered into the street. "June! June!" Both men drew long-barrel weapons and trotted around the corner. "What happened, then?" "Somebody attacked me," he said in a weak voice. "Let's get in there and get the attacker, Kwang. Kill him!" Patch raised his brows and gripped the gun. "I need medical help," said Zahn as he collapsed on the street. "This is not what we had planned. Get Zahn back into the car. I'll get Kincaid. Call Danforth and Feldman from the car and tell them what happened." June headed directly toward Patch's ranch house as the older Quang lifted Zahn from under the armpits and dragged him toward the BMW. June reached the front door and kicked it open. He disappeared inside, but less than a minute later he emerged back on the front lawn. Flashes brightened on the surrounding trees and houses. June immediately backtracked across the road. He reached the BMW and helped Quang lift Zahn in the car. Patch memorized the tag number, 427-1717. A black and white cruiser, roof lights rotating rapidly, drove diagonally onto Patch's lawn. Patch hurled the revolver into the bushes. Two cops flew out of the car as the BMW, lights out, slowly drove away from the curb. The cops took positions on either side of the house's open door. "Over here!" shouted Patch. "I'm Kincaid." One officer stayed at the door, and the other, in full uniform and gun drawn, bounced between the trees toward Patch. "What happened, Kincaid?" "Three guys in a BMW. I have the plate number, 427-1717. The car just went up 14th. The officer unhooked a small tablet off his belt. He typed the tag number into the tablet. "Anyone in the house?" "No, sir." "No one in the residence," he said as he jogged toward the cruiser. He quickly slid inside and read the plate number to the dispatcher. The other cop reached the cruiser. "What's going on here?" Patch looked into his gray eyes. Two of them, Jun and Quang, waited at the corner near the BMW while they sent the kid, Zahn, after me. I hit him with a bat and took his gun. I threw it in the bushes over there. "Okay, we'll get it." "Why would somebody come after you, Kincaid?" asked the second cop. "I don't know. You got the tag. Someone will pull them over and you can ask them." Chapter 4. Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas, January 14th, 2013, 9:35 a.m. During the night, snow and ice pellets had blanketed the open grass across the plaza. Patch set his steaming styrofoam cup and jelly donuts on his table. His eyes stung from a lack of sleep, but the cold air kept him awake. Herman was already on the street. He too held up a cup of coffee, and his huge brown eyes watered in the freezing air. "God damn it, Patch, I heard about last night. Who were they?" "Foreigners. I reported it to the police." "Why have you got your table set up here? If it were me, I'd be on the next flat rail out of this friggin' place." Patch flipped the MP3 switch to a 1963 civil rights speech by Kennedy. "Which speech is that?" It was after the ruckus at the University of Alabama. Both Kennedys ruffled a lot of feathers. George Wallace backed down and 2 African-American students matriculated. Say what? They entered classes because Kennedy federalized the National Guard. "Good evening, my fellow citizens. This afternoon, following a series of threats and defiant statements, the presence of the Alabama National Guardsmen was required on the University of Alabama to carry out a final and unequivocal order of the United States District Court of the Northern District of Alabama. That order called for the admission of 2 clearly qualified young Alabama residents who just happened to be born Negro. That they were admitted peacefully on campus is due in good measure to the conduct of the students of the University of Alabama who met their responsibilities in a constructive way. Getting back to last night, Patch, was they going to kidnap you?" Patch squished the jelly and sugar donut between his teeth. Then he sent hot coffee into the mixture. "Herman, they can kidnap me, they can bring me to this gizmo time machine they built. I don't care. They probably need help from me because Minkowitz is on the way out. What I'm saying is I don't have to cooperate with them. What if the cops got the beamer? Don't count on it." Herman spotted a family near the corner of Houston and Elm. He raised his hand to shield his eyes. "Nicer day today, Patch. More people. And I gotta make a living. You be careful, Patch." He held up his assassination paper and moved down the sidewalk. For the next few minutes, Patch listened to Herman's soapbox assassination speech as Kennedy's voice crackled out of the speakers. "This is one country. It's become one country because of all of us and all the people who came here had an equal chance to develop their talents. We cannot say to 10% of the population, you can't have that right, that your children cannot have the chance to develop whatever talents they have, that the only way that they are going to get their rights is to go in the streets and demonstrate. I think we owe them and we owe ourselves a better country than that. As he contemplated Kennedy's speech, Patch stared at the boombox. He descended the hill toward the sidewalk, squinting in the sun as he gazed up at the Reunion Tower, silhouetted against the brightening sky. Kennedy's words faded away near the knoll behind him. He wondered if the men in the BMW would dare come back now the cops were involved. More gawkers milled around the grass stretch across the road between Main and Elm Street. They formed the usual tourist route across the triple underpass to the asphalt parking lot behind the stockade fence. This plaza would have just been another park had Kennedy not been killed here. Back on the hill, Jun and the white-haired Quang stood behind his table. They overturned the table when they saw him. All the CDs and the boombox tumbled down the grass. Then they broke into a run after him. Patch pivoted and sprinted up the hill toward the railroad underpass. He dodged more gawkers up top. Maybe he could disappear inside the bulky blue reflective hotel diagonal to the railroad tracks and in the observation tower. Quang and Jun ran across the parking lot behind the knoll's stockade fence. Patch leaped over the railroad bed and hurdled the steel tracks. Several shots echoed as he approached the tree clump adjacent to the hotel road and tower. One of the bullets scattered the cedar mulch next to his left foot. Getting inside one of those buildings would give him cover and a chance to disappear. Why would they want him dead? The BMW's tires screeched as a motorcycle raced toward the loop road. The car fishtailed from side to side. Patch, his stomach muscles cramping, scrambled toward the ever-present tower. Being in a public place might keep him alive, or maybe it didn't matter to these people. His shoulder hit the tower door. He stopped for a second in a small open mezzanine and then slipped with a couple into the glass elevator. As the doors closed and the elevator rose, Quang and Jun entered the lobby below. His heart pattered like an out-of-control child's wind-up toy. No doubt they would trail him to the top of this observatory. The couple, a man in a navy wool suit and a woman in a form-fit red satin dress, exchanged loud kisses as the Dallas skyline expanded above the streets. The woman's alluring perfume drew his attention to her long blonde hair and red high heels. Soon he saw the scrubby flatlands south of the city. He breathed heavily from the run, apparently without disturbing the preoccupied lovers. About a minute later, the doors parted to the chatter of an elegant restaurant with patrons positioned at dining tables overlooking the tower's crisscross supports and the horizon beyond. Patch waited in the elevator as the kissing couple sashayed into the restaurant. Then he slipped out the doors. He wandered over to the observation window. The plaza looked tranquil through the supports at this height. Behind him, two more men with little green cell phones rocketed out of the adjacent elevator doors. Patch sidestepped as if he were performing a dance routine along the wall into the kitchen. He backed into the swinging black doors with a tiny square window. A toothpick of a woman, an Asian, dressed in white with a food cap over her dark hair, looked quizzically at him. "Is there a stairway in the tower?" The woman, startled, opened her dark eyes. "The only stairway is an observation deck, but it's closed." He spotted a gray metal maintenance door between the food shelves and back. "Thanks." He glanced through the square window before he ran. A man in a black tuxedo now spoke with the dark-haired Jun. Two huge men in suits moved from table to table. Patch scrambled up toward the gray fire door. Seconds later, he ascended a dusty, dimly lit, enclosed concrete stairwell. He entered a circular corridor up top. Another door, around 20 feet ahead, was marked HVAC units. Observation area temporarily closed to the public. The air currents pushed him back when he nudged the heavier door. He climbed into a windy, brightly lit area. Clouds chugged by the tower and the blue sky beyond the cylindrical units. Although he had shed his pursuers, this walkway offered no exit other than the 500-foot drop to the plaza. Several cars, including the BMW, were parked diagonally next to the massive glass hotel, glistening in the sunlight down the slope from the tower. As he turned, Nick Tobias removed a gun from beneath his leather coat. "What is it you people want?" shouted Patch through the wind as he walked closer. "You gonna kill me just because I don't want to be a part of your goddamn time travel project?" "I'm not with them, Patch," he said in a low voice. "I'm with McCabe. They're from a Far East consortium hired by the Chinese. You killed one of their guys last night. They need your help with the time chamber. They're pretty pissed off right now." Patch looked down to the railroad tracks far below, toward the triple underpass and the parking lot beyond the stockade fence. "I don't believe you. Hell, I could kill you right now." Patch slowly turned and smiled. "That's true. Listen, I can get you out of here. You don't want to be captured by the Chinese." "That's not very reassuring, Nick. They said they want me to go back to 1963 and prevent Kennedy from being killed, right?" "Wrong. The Chinese want you to help fine-tune the retrograde components to the dilation. They're having trouble using the retrograde bubble back through time. Dr. Moon and the Chinese, who are after you now, have their own plans." "They pulled him out of the mental institution." "Yes, and they want my help. Once the retrograde works properly, they can send anyone back in time and change anything according to their own specifications, how they want time to flow. They're bullshitting you about preventing Kennedy's death in order to lure you in." Through the tower's outside supports, Patch followed Elm Street up to the sandstone building housing the museum. "I might be able to fine-tune retrograde, Nick, but I can't fine-tune history. It seems easy, but look what happened right down there in the plaza in 1963 because I changed something." Nick motioned him to the left. "I have a cart in the kitchen. I'm going to wheel you into the elevator. Just like that. Unless you have a frigging parachute, Patch, I suggest you move your ass." Patch exhaled and then spun around. He retraced his route onto the slippery concrete stairs. At the bottom of the door, Nick squeezed around his shoulder and with the gun pointed up, checked the kitchen and hall. He advised Patch to stay in the stairwell. He then tucked the gun in his pants and casually entered the kitchen. Through the door crack, Patch saw him open a side closet door near the food shelves. He dragged a white canvas cart across the maroon tiles. "Get in." Patch backed into the cart and nestled himself in a fetal position against the canvas. Nick removed his coat and donned a white food cap. Then he covered Patch with his pungent leather jacket and heaped handfuls of dry white towels over the coat. "Just keep your mouth shut till we get to my motorcycle." Patch remained crunched under the towels. The cart hit the outside door almost immediately and rolled over a rough surface, perhaps the restaurant rug. After several beeps, he assumed Nick had pushed the cart near the elevator. The sliding doors vibrated throughout the cart, moving inside like a race car over a speed bump. Once the elevator began the descent through the tower shaft, Patch parted the pile of towels. "Thanks. Don't mention it. You're seconds away from either being kidnapped or executed." "Why? I thought they wanted my help." "I have no idea what they want right now. With Minkwitz out to pasture, Patch, there are competing groups going after you. Like McCabe. Haven't seen him." "How did you know I was up here, Nick?" Nick pressed his lips. "We've been watching you for weeks. I got the report about the BMW this morning. I was in the museum when the goons appeared near your table. I followed you up here on my motorcycle. It's parked in the lot below the tower. Just have to figure out how I'm going to get you down to the hotel lot." "Right. The laundry cart routine won't work well outside the building. I can get you to the outside, hopefully without any bloodshed." Patch placed both hands against the tower's cold concrete as Nick casually walked toward the lower lot across from the hotel below. The motorcycle started a few hundred yards away. Nick circled his motorcycle around the service road leading up to the blue-tinted, reflective motel. Under the tower, another 3 men in lightweight jackets exited a black Hummer and walked toward the entrance. Nick skidded his bike in front of the hotel and touched his feet to the pavement. Patch sidestepped diagonally in the cold air so they would not see him from inside the tower. Cold sweat trickled onto his cheeks. Nick nodded from the idling bike when Patch reached the hotel. He ran along the glass and straddled the seat. Nick steered the motorcycle ever so gradually 180 degrees around the road. "Those men in the Hummer don't look like tourists." The oncoming wind numbed his hands as Nick talked over his shoulder. Agents don't have to look like spiffy uniforms. You mean like those guys down the bottom of this hill? Two men with handguns blocked the road. Exactly, said Nick as he removed a .22 pistol and handed it to Patch. Then he reached down and pulled out a .38 from the bike compartment. We wait till we're right on them, Patch. When they raise their guns, you take the one on the right. Understood. Patch's eyes watered as he focused on the two men in dark vests and jeans. As the Psycho bounced over the speed bump, Nick lifted his gun slightly. The two men assumed firing positions. Patch aimed at the beady-eyed guy on the right. He missed the first shot. The second shot hit the man's shoulder, but the guy fired wild before rolling down the grass slope. Nick brought down the man on the left with one shot. The motorcycle sped between the fallen men and swung at a steep angle near the tree clump. Nick stabilized the bike across the grass. Then the bike became airborne over the sidewalk and accelerated at high speed toward the highway. He veered back toward the plaza. "Why are you going back there?" shouted Patch. "They'll find us there for sure." "I know what I'm doing." He was back at the museum a half a minute later. He cut the engine and quickly dismounted. He motioned Patch to a small Honda Civic next to the fence, and they got inside. Slick, very slick. It'll be slick once I get you out of town. I told you I don't want to be involved in this time travel stuff. Nick looked into the rearview mirror as he rounded the lot and proceeded along the road behind the museum. Look back toward the tower. About a dozen police cars had converged around the tower. You've got to be kidding. He raced away at high speed. A box truck slowed and then blocked the road. Nick rapidly turned the wheel. The car spun like a top and then flipped. Patch hit the ceiling as they tumbled end over end. Blood streaks cascaded down Nick's forehead. But then he spoke in a guttural utterance. "Patch, my arm, ribs, broken." His head throbbed as he slumped in the seat. He heard voices and people running. Nick's words slowly faded, and the bright glare outside darkened as Patch passed out. Chapter 5. Location and time unknown. Patch awoke groggy to the hum of a jet engine and instrument panel beeps. A wide Band-Aid crossed his forehead above his left eye, and a beige elastic bandage circled his left wrist. His upper back was tight. The lack of ground lights below and the starry sky indicated an ocean route. He sat up and unhooked his seatbelt. Ahead, a pilot in front of a brightly lit instrument panel spoke into a headset microphone. Patch steadied himself on the forward seat and shuffled down the aisle. His head ached behind his eyes and his left temple. He held both sides of the aluminum door frame. "So, where are we?" The pilot turned. His slanted eyes popped open and he slid off the headset. "You should be back in your seat, Captain. We will be landing soon." Patch stepped into the darkened cabin. "I want to know what the hell happened. Where's Nick Tobias?" "Not for me to say." Patch leaned forward to the cabin window. He followed a line from the Big Dipper pointer stars to the North Star. Cassiopeia was overhead. Then he studied the sweeping radar screen. He checked the altitude. They were descending from 11,400 feet. "We're along the Canadian coast. Where are we headed, Alaska?" He fell back into the co-pilot's chair. "You're being tailed. I would guess F-16s. The pilot said nothing as Patch looked ahead. A row of yellow pinpoints appeared at a 45-degree angle in the blackness. The linear lights lined the runway and rose like the sun over the horizon. As he buckled the seatbelt, Patch memorized the latitude. It's 52.71 and the longitude 174. He estimated the pursuing jets were less than half an hour behind. The craft wafted for a second as it approached the runway. The nighttime tundra soon whipped by. To the right, building outlines appeared beyond the glare. The wheels bounced off the pavement and then made a solid landing as the pilot applied the brakes. Patch held the edge of the vinyl seat as the jet whipped to the right and slid diagonally toward a Quonset hut hangar, illuminated by several spotlight bulbs. Two men in heavy fur-lined parkas trotted onto the runway. A larger jet with Korean markings jutted out of the hangar. The jet grinded to a stop on the frosty asphalt. The pilot depressurized the cabin and turned to Patch. "You will proceed down the stairs to Mr. Danforth." He pushed a button and the outside stairs unlocked. A motor whined and the stairs opened to the icy air outside. When the motor stopped and the stairs hit the ground, the pilot turned to Patch. "Please, go ahead." Patch moved toward the hatch. The first man up the stairs pulled back his fur-lined hood, revealing a crop of peppered hair and wide blue eyes. "I'm John Danforth. Why have you kidnapped me, Mr. Danforth?" The light-skinned Danforth stared at him and produced a fixed smile. "Oh, Captain, we are engaged for the greater good. We can hardly call your little trip kidnapping. We have to leave now." "Who are you?" Danforth smiled and the lines around his eyes tightened. "A man who has been hired to deliver you. Now come with me." "So I naturally just want to cooperate with you in whatever game you're playing." "I think you'll see my point of view. You're not American. I am from Amsterdam." Patch ducked his head at the hatch and started down the stairs. The cold wind blew back his hair and his beard. The Korean jet engines grew louder. Bright lights inside the cabin above his shoulders cast shadows onto the hangar concrete. A larger stairway was angled down the length of the jet. "Where's the time chamber, Danforth? The Chinese had built it somewhere." "I could not divulge that information." A bald-headed man in a red jumpsuit met Danforth ahead. He motioned Patch up the stairs. "My name is Feldman, and you're being disrespectful." Patch stared at Feldman. "Then what is Moon up to?" "Dr. Alexander Moon is the force behind the time chamber." Patch squinted. "Stolen from Ray Minkowitz's notes, no doubt. We have an executable plan. It will work, believe me. How much are they paying you?" "Not your concern." "And just who are you and Moon working for? The Chinese?" Danforth said nothing as Patch sat in the second row next to the window in the new jet. Danforth and Feldman leaned over the pilot's console as the pilot finished his checks. "We have no power," said the pilot. "What happened?" asked Danforth. Feldman pointed at the instruments. "Someone has tampered with the power levels." As he spoke, the jet shook as if a pack of horses were galloping up the stairs. A huge-framed, unshaven sergeant in a camouflage uniform wielded an oversized weapon at the top of the stairs. Danforth slowly turned. "What is this?" He extended the weapon outward. "We've been waiting up here for you, Captain Kincaid." More soldiers stood like ghosts on the darkened runway. Danforth stepped toward the sergeant. "How did you know we were up here?" "Shut up. I'm Hugo Feldman. My organization will not tolerate this insolence." Feldman stepped ahead of Danforth. "I don't think you realize the superior force, Mr. Feldman. We've been monitoring both of you for some time. We know of your partnership with Alexander Moon. Moon at one time worked for our agencies, and we believe he's working for the Chinese. Is that correct?" "Go to hell," said Feldman, tightening his lips. He turned with a pistol in his hand. The sergeant aimed quickly at Feldman's body, twirled back as if he were doing a cartwheel. When he landed, blood spread from a huge jagged hole in his chest. "That man is a billionaire, you fool!" cried Danforth. The sergeant, as he slowly stepped down the aisle, said, "We know that you and Moon are going to use the stolen United States dilation technology to change history." Danforth squinted. "Dr. Moon was funded by the Chinese." He glanced at Feldman's body spread across the rug. "The military helped him." "Who in the military?" asked the sergeant. Danforth's eyes watered. "General Quang is the contact." "Where is the facility?" Danforth collapsed into the seat and placed his head in his hands. "Hong Kong." The sergeant turned down the stairs. "Get the body out of here and place Danforth under guard in the lunch area until the colonel arrives." "The colonel?" asked Patch. "You know him, Captain. Colonel Michael McCabe." Chapter 6. Boswell Landing Strip. Latitude 52.71, longitude 174. Aleutian Islands, Alaska. 6:06 a.m. Outside the frosted window edges, the daylight spread with shadows across the gray tundra and into the hangar. 2 young soldiers guarded Danforth in the kitchenette behind the counter. The F-16s never landed, but a huge beige transport had touched down in the morning sun just a few minutes ago. On the runway, a jeep pulled several oversized camouflage cubicles down the ramp from the transport. Over the next 20 minutes, as if they had landed on a faraway planet, several contingents of soldiers connected the cubicles into a circle. Generators and water tanks soon formed a ring around the structure. Patch heard the generators kick in. Long spider-like legs extended downward from a gray central disc above the cubicles. Soldiers connected each cubicle with accordion walls, and then they sealed the outer edges. Around 9:30 local time, McCabe, dressed in fatigues and a matching baseball cap, accompanied 3 armed soldiers toward the hangar. Patch approached the guarded door. The door crashed open, and McCabe's soldiers ordered the younger men to stand with their sergeant. The blue-eyed McCabe looked rested. "I see you're okay, Patch." "So, you're military, McCabe." "I am." "Why don't you just kill me now like you tried to at the tower?" "That wasn't us. That attack put Nick Tobias in the hospital." "Who did it?" "Simply stated, the Chinese." Patch looked over his shoulder. "What are you doing, starting your own city out there?" "I have my orders." "Everybody has their orders, and nobody's saying anything." McCabe produced a slight smile and raised his brow. "What is it you hope to accomplish here?" "We have a plan." "Really? And how does this relate to—" A slender brunette walked briskly ahead of the soldiers across the runway. "I think we need a program to identify the players here. Nick Tobias saved my life." "We're all on the same side, Patch, even you." "Whatever that means." "It means Dr. Moon and the Chinese. Their time travel project may not be in the best interest of the United States or the world." "How do you know this?" he asked as the woman entered the room. She had soft green eyes, short hair, and red-painted nails. "Captain, this is Dr. Eve Tomlinson." She produced a friendly smile. "According to our briefings, Captain, I understand the Chinese want to send you back in time. Look, I've been drugged and interrogated by the best back in the 60s. I've read the reports of Dr. Carson, rather brutal, reckless, and untargeted. Fortunately, over the past 50 years, we have refined our techniques." "What are you going to do? And, better yet, why do you have to do anything?" Dr. Tomlinson turned toward McCabe. "Captain, we want some protection," said McCabe, pacing slightly by the window. "Protection? I don't want you back in the 1960s trying to change Kennedy's death." Patch realized he would, if given the opportunity, prevent JFK from dying. "So you're going to program me not to go back?" "Something like that." He stepped up to Patch. "There's more to this. Dr. Moon is a very vindictive individual. What exactly do the Chinese want to do?" "I don't know," said McCabe. "That will require further questioning of Danforth, Captain. He obviously knows. We have the schematics on all our tablets from their complex in Hong Kong." "And just what is in that complex?" asked Patch. "You no longer have a security clearance for that information." "We can assure you, Captain, we have the situation under control," said Tomlinson. Patch shook his head and retreated to the coffee maker. Then he turned. "I have a news bulletin for you 2 angels. I'm not cooperating with you. I don't believe either of you." "You have no choice," said McCabe. "Mankiewicz tells us he can fully understand the Chinese project." "Mankiewicz?" "Ray Mankiewicz is in an assisted living facility in Florida. You know that." McCabe shook his head. "Not exactly true." "So you're telling me Mankiewicz is in special ops now?" asked Patch, nervously laughing. "Being dropped into some Hong Kong facility in his old age to secure the complex? This is no game, Captain. We will gain control of that facility in Hong Kong. They need your retrograde knowledge because they believe Ray is dying in Florida. The retrograde in the Hong Kong chamber is not working properly." "I heard that from one of those men trying to get me." Patch stared at him for several seconds. "Just leave me out of it." "They're expecting your knowledge, Captain. It's just that we don't trust you." Patch stepped forward. "You don't trust me?" A man in an orange parka appeared in the room. "Recovery room 6 is ready, Dr. Tomlinson." "Thank you, Corporal." McCabe's eyes swung toward Patch. He threw a Parker to Patch. You heard him, Captain, R6. Listen, McCabe. Colonel. McCabe raised his brows back at Tomlinson and then turned to Patch. He shook his head and then motioned Patch back into the hangar. McCabe handed him a pair of sunglasses, and they exited through the open hangar door to a bright blue cloudless sky. Being treated is painless, said Dr. Tomlinson. Treated? Asked Patch as the cold wind swept up the island runway. So you want me to forget the whole thing? Tomlinson shook her head as they hurried across the runway. The Spider building produced shadows across the asphalt. I'll be up front. We have the specifications for you. You won't remember any of this, Captain, even when we shave off that beard. They moved through the shadows. The frigid air nipped at his face. As I become a Manchurian candidate? Hell no, that's not something we want, said McCabe. You will simply have key memories masked, and everything that happens here in the next week will also be slowly impeded. There'll be an initial blockage followed by a normal memory, and then in a 72-hour to 96-hour span, full dememorization will settle in for an indefinite time period. Why? Because it's necessary, Captain. What about crazy Dr. Moon? Asked Patch. Listen to me. Dr. Moon may have some psychotic tendencies, but he's brilliant at the same time, and he's working along with the Chinese. McCabe stopped at the glass doors, reflecting the transport in the background light. In the other timeline, Mankiewicz perfected the time chamber at Sector 13. Moon, in this timeline, through elaborate espionage over the years, had Ray's work stolen from the National Archives, classified stuff in New Mexico. That's how they built the complex in Hong Kong. We can't let the Chinese have the upper hand here. It's critical. What happens to Moon? Do you kill him? No, we bring Moon back to the United States. He'll be confined for the rest of his life, and we'll gain all the information we can from him. No one must ever again travel back in time. Smart move. McCabe opened the door for Tomlinson, and they all stepped into a warmer, cleaner carpeted lobby. After you. This is like a small office building. Two dark-skinned guards in combat gear stood on either side of an open door to his right. They saluted McCabe as he passed through with Patch. Sunlight entered through the thin blinds of an aluminum frame window. Two older nurses waited in medical fatigues between a bed with white sheets and the aqua-tiled wall. The room reeked of antiseptic chemicals similar to iodine, probably stored underneath the center stainless steel table. The wood door closed tightly, and two middle-aged men, also in scrub fatigues, entered from an adjacent room. Patch turned to McCabe. For the record, I don't want any part of this. I don't want my memories masked. You have no choice. You have to be prepared for any contingency. You mean programmed. A clear funnel filled with red and blue beads extended up to the ceiling. What the hell is that? We're going to perform a procedure with time-release nanoparticles to address a process called reconsolidation, said Tomlinson as she suited up in a side room. We are now able to specify the cells that prompt an engram for a specific memory. We block the specific memories. How is that accomplished? All our memories are associations, an assortment of things such as objects, space, and time. These comparisons by the brain are encoded as the neurons change chemically and physically. Also, the neuron connections are affected. So all of a sudden I start acting like your robot. Not that simple. Our new technology allows cells to be selectively turned off and on using engineered nanoparticles. Encoded memories are charted on our scans and thus can be turned off when we question you. We will target with electroconvulsive waves from the nanoparticles. When we ask you pertinent questions, that will soon be forgotten. Blocked memories do not compete with other memories. You may not remember your childhood, but you will remember President Eisenhower. Just like a drone. No, said McCabe abruptly as he came back in the room. We cannot permit the Chinese using you to change time in any way. The memory loss won't last forever, Patch. He marched up to the doctor. This is bullshit. First, we will administer a muscle relaxant. The outside soldiers quickly surrounded Patch with two pistols. Tomlinson appeared with a needle, the reservoir fully filled. The black hands on the white-faced clock had just passed 7 a.m. I'll say it again, things never change, McCabe. No matter what time period it is, there's always some son of a bitch who thinks he can simply tell everybody else what to do. The long needle entered his side, and coldness spread up from his hip. Unlike his past interrogation, he sensed no grogginess, and his weakened muscles were cold and tight. Two technicians rolled in an hourglass vial containing the minuscule red and blue beads in a thick binder. Nanoparticles inside these beads will enter your system, Captain. They are time-released. Each type of particle is targeted to a specific area of your brain, and over a period of time, they dictate and manipulate certain behaviors and processes. Then we will verbally alter your consciousness as we dememorize. You people are crazy. Captain, you only feel the local anesthetics and the insertion of the stents in your forearm. You will remember nothing of the dememorization. It is a long process. Everyday functioning is not impaired. Just a diversion of certain thoughts. Here's the important aspect of all this. Your present memory will spring back. All will appear normal for a few days, and then the full force sets in. All your pertinent memories, Captain, will be indefinitely blocked. You can't do this to me. Tomlinson raised her dark brows. Hopefully nothing goes wrong once you're in Hong Kong. Hong Kong? We will let Danforth think he's escaping. He will bring you to Moon and then inside the complex itself. Danforth isn't stupid. No, he isn't. But under intense pressure, a man believes what he wants to believe. Tomlinson leaned toward him. Her face was inches away. What's your name? Robert Garrison Kincaid, Jr. Very good. It's not important that you remember your name. Why? What is your name? Kincaid. Robert Garrison. I'm having trouble remembering. Her voice echoed. You will not remember your name or your nickname, Patch. I don't know my name. Good, good. What is your nickname? Patch. You have no recollection of your name, do you? I have no recollection of my name. Very good, very good. The needles quickly numbed his right wrist. He stared at the perforated ceiling tiles as they worked on his arm. They connected the stent to the hourglass through a clear tube. Machines monitored his vital signs on brightly colored screens. Internal entry and absorption of the nanoparticles were designated by a series of complex ascending yellow numbers on a red screen. Patch remained relaxed, alert, and non-combative. Time melted with the advancing clock hands. The shadows changed and the lights softened outside. Tomlinson and the men in scrubs continuously pummeled him with instructions from their tablets. It was as if someone were playing scrambled background music at a party. Patch answered, yet he never remembered what he had just said. The funnel was now half full of beads. I know you're taking my thoughts away. You have no memory of your life, none. You will remember the recent past for a short time. Can you hear me? I hear you. You have no memory of your own life, do you? No, I don't. Where were you born? I don't know where I was born. Where did you come from before you arrived in this room? I don't know. I don't. Who am I? Where am I? Who am I? I don't know. I don't know. Relax, Captain. The memories will spring back for another few days while you're in the complex, before they are fully blocked. Eventually you will remember none of this. I will remember none of this. Chapter 7. Field Medical Facility, Boswell Landing Strip, latitude 52.71 and longitude 174, Aleutian Islands, Alaska, 6:06 a.m. His thoughts remained clear as he marched ahead of Danforth toward the Korean jet. You look different without your beard, said Danforth. You want me to fly this, don't you? You're a trained pilot. I am. Danforth actually had the guard's weapon. He had forced both men into a closet back at the hangar. Are you nuts, Danforth? They'll kill you. Patch stared at him. They're letting you escape. Sure they are. The jet's stairs extended downward to the hangar concrete. Let's go. His memory bobbed and weaved. He would remember his name and then forget it. 3 soldiers moved from the transport outside. Danforth fanned the AK-47 and they leaped for cover. Don't you think they would have shot you? Shut up and get up the stairs. Danforth jammed the barrel into Patch's back all the way up the stairs. He pushed a button and the stairs moved upward in the belly of the jet. You need to get this thing out of here right now. We should check systems. He leaned toward the window. No time. Patch sat in the pilot's seat. He placed the headphones over his head, pressurized the cabin, and quickly opened up the engines. Soldiers appeared by the transport as Patch taxied onto the runway. Although the soldiers aimed their weapons, no one fired. The jet rolled down the asphalt along the brown tundra. I need coordinates, said Patch. Just get us airborne. We have enough fuel to get us to the fuel plane. The course is already in the computer. He gained speed but shook his head. The flaps moved and then they were in the air. You and that idiot Moon are asking for trouble. You have no idea. Yeah, I do. I realize the Chinese are up to no good. The Chinese are merely the ones who built the complex per Dr. Moon's specifications. Moon stole classified materials. There are people in this world, Patch, who want to rectify history. The United States has had unfair advantages at the expense of other nations. Danforth sat in the adjacent seat as they wafted above the clouds and into the bright sun. He moved his open hand down the length of his face. What's your angle, Danforth? I deliver you to Moon and I get $10 million. You solve the retrograde problem so they can go back in time and I get another 10. I was initially involved as the conduit for the Chinese military and the funding. And the Chinese have their own agenda. Correct. Patch, for the first time, thought about using the time chamber for his own purposes. If he could return to 1963, he could prevent Kennedy's death. What makes you think I'm going to cooperate in any way? Danforth stared across the clouds over the Pacific far below. Every man has his price. As the sun transited over the horizon, Patch flew the prearranged flight plan programmed into the computer. He checked the instrument panel. A blue countdown timer indicated a rendezvous with a fuel ship in 26 minutes. Arrival in Hong Kong would be after midnight. Patch squinted and followed the horizon as the jet gently hummed above the ocean. He ran his fingers over his smooth cheeks. What happens when we get to Hong Kong? We will meet with Dr. Moon and you'll be brought into the complex. Then you will utilize your knowledge to stabilize the retrograde bubble. You mean they can't bring people back? The surrounding bubble is not stable. It takes many attempts for the bubble to return to the future. A few times the bubble did not return. But I warn you, said Danforth, raising his index finger, don't try any shenanigans. Danforth looped his arm over the seat as he spoke into the headphone mic. Yes, Dr. Moon, the refueling is 80% complete. What? McKay's man killed Feldman. Patch turned from the long black fuel line outside the jet. Danforth wiped his forehead with a white handkerchief. No, he is dead. Captain Kincaid is flying the plane. I understand. You will just have to adjust to reality. I agree. Thank you. Thank you. Patch leaned back in the seat as Danforth set down the microphone. Sounds like Moon is pleased as punch. That's not funny. What did he say about Feldman? Danforth scowled, maneuvered his body out of the seat, and headed down the aisle. That is none of your business. What makes you think I'm going to cooperate? You know that, Danforth. You know what, Danforth? People like you scare me more than Moon and the whole Chinese army. Why is that? He asked with a wide, condescending smile in the afternoon sunlight. Because manipulators like you take away the most essential element of humanity. Oh, and what the hell is that? Freedom. Chapter 8. 102nd floor, Bank of China Tower, Hong Kong, China, February 17th, 2013. From the skyscraper window, Danforth scoured the blue harbor and the puzzle-like islands surrounding the city. This morning, the Bank of China Tower almost touched the scattered harbor clouds. Swooping white leather sofas and modern metal floor lamps followed the inner walls. A trim white rug inlaid between deep-set green tiles bordered the room. On the side table, a huge glowing swivel tank provided a steady stream of brightly colored fish. Patch, I want your cooperation when Dr. Moon arrives, said Danforth. Isn't it enough Captain Kincaid has arrived safe and sound? Dr. Moon, said the astonished Danforth. A beanpole of a man in a blue leisure suit took large strides across the room. His short graying hair had an uneven cut, and he had irregular slits for eyes. He extended his enormous, clammy cold hand. A pleasure to meet you, Captain Kincaid, even though you nixed my computer link-up. Dr. Moon in the flesh, said Patch, looking up at him. Moon's blue eyes were visible for a second as he held on to Patch's hand. I've studied your trip back to 1961, from Hastings Mountain. Amazing feat for you as the time traveler. I'll call you Ray Mankowitz's scientific mechanic. Mankowitz accomplished the impossible. He stopped the death of everyone in U.S. cities, said Moon, finally releasing his hand. His eyes wandered upward, occasionally as if he had gone to some faraway place, and killed John F. Kennedy. Moon's eyes popped open. He banged his fists on the side table, shaking the fish tank. His voice matched his burgeoning anger. I am not concerned with the death of Kennedy. That is not reasonable. Reasonable? He pointed his finger at Patch. I'm in charge here, Kincaid. Not confronting the cantankerous Moon, maybe he could stop Kennedy from traveling to Dallas. Danforth stepped forward. I've made the final arrangements for our trip to the temple, Dr. Moon. Good. Then he turned to Patch. His blue eyes had a bizarre, crazed appearance. Kincaid, you will fine-tune the retrograde aspects of our chamber. Have you sent anyone else back in time? To a point. Moon swung his huge body into one of the white leather side cushions and then spread his arm over the back. Sit down. Mankowitz's National Archive material would have been essential, Dr. Moon, said Patch as he sat on an adjacent cushion. Again, Moon's voice became amplified. Mankowitz should be given no credit. I've spent decades gathering and building upon Mankowitz's original material. I've copied it slowly and methodically over the years from 1961. You mean stolen? Moon stood up straight. You just remember that you're expendable, Kincaid. Do not accuse me of pilferage. Patch pinched the bridge of his nose. Again, he thought of Dealey Plaza and Kennedy gunned down by Oswald from the sixth-floor window in 1963. A rope seemed to tighten around his thoughts. It attacked his mind like the incoming tide. He shook his head quickly. Are you all right, Captain? Asked Danforth. I must be tired. We're all tired, said Moon in disgust. Get him a goddamn drink, John. Danforth stood at the small bar. No, I'm fine. I say, let's get a look at what you've done and maybe do a power-up and get my mission underway. Moon grabbed a glass from the bar and just held it. That's a better attitude. Patch closed his eyes and inhaled the purified air. According to Danforth, he would travel with the volatile Moon to Chong Chat and the Pak Tai Temple. The complex, Mankowitz's stepchild, the new version of the ill-fated Sector 13 project inside Hastings Mountain, had been carved out far below the temple and harbor. He now had a choice between the temptation and risk of changing history, pitted against destroying the ability of anyone to travel back in time. Chapter 9. Upper Suites, Richmond Arms, Hong Kong, China, February 18th, 2013. Mankowitz's eyes stung because he had stayed awake all night on the military jet from Florida to the base in Guam via El Toro in California. Once he arrived in Hong Kong, he slept for a solid 10 hours. He moved on to the apartment balcony above the harbor. A slight wind kicked up across the water. He flipped his hair back in place. His thoughts centered back to when he had first retired and received a call from Virginia. Some upper-level operative in the White House had informed him that all his records about time dilation had been stolen from the well-guarded Building 1842, nestled between the mountains in Independence, New Mexico. Everything he had learned from his chats with Patch in 1961 had added to his own theories. While Patch had been taken into the future, Mankowitz was imprisoned in Cuba. He later organized the storage on the third floor of a long cinder block structure in New Mexico. After the theft, he began 18 months of refurbishing Building 1842 with what he could remember. He added to that work on a regular basis, but because of the fragility of changing time, they never let him pursue his goal of constructing a time dilation complex as he had in Patch's 1986 timeline at Hastings Mountain. He had even hiked Hastings Mountain beginning in 1971, 9 years after Patch had retrograded from the dam at Agua del Pueblo in Santa Clara, Cuba. He returned to the mountain every July, but never found any evidence of a facility in the new timeline produced because of Patch's return to 1961 from 1986. The same new timeline had killed Kennedy in 1963, and he did not know why. Patch's debriefing in 2003 after he landed from Agua del Pueblo into Liberty Park in New Jersey added substantially to Building 1842's information. They flew Patch out there with him 3 times until Patch refused to help any further. He moved to Dallas in 2007 and began selling products about President Kennedy from a table in Dealey Plaza where the president had been killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. Mankiewicz met Mike McCabe in 2010 when intelligence learned that Dr. Alexander Moon had been working in China for years. Moon had personally led a special ops team from the former Soviet Union into Building 1842 by utilizing halothane and other gases to render all personnel unconscious. In 3 hours, all materials had been trucked out of the area. In a month, the Russians had the contents in their own facility off the Lena River in Siberia. The Russians never really funded the operation, but Moon's research continued. When the Soviet Empire fell in 1989, Moon convinced the Russians to sell the project to the Chinese. Plans for the Hong Kong facility began in earnest in 1993. 20 years later, the complex under the harbor nudged precariously close to operational status. In 2010, when he met McCabe in New Mexico, Mankiewicz suggested that Patch be brought in from Texas, but Patch's security clearance had not been updated, and his activities in Dealey Plaza were deemed suspicious. Patch remained in Dallas while a special group closely monitored the Chinese facility. During the end of 2012, Moon unsuccessfully sent men back in time. Retrograde instability had killed 6 people. Only then did McCabe consider using Patch, and so did the Chinese. Groups had Patch under surveillance for months, and now McCabe had commenced a plan to penetrate and thwart the Chinese time dilation project. Mankiewicz stood in front of the PowerPoint screen. He highlighted a layman's guide to retrograde. McCabe did not want to understand the scientific aspects of time travel. Mankiewicz used the analogy of how retrograde was like sending a bubble back upstream. Inside the bubble, the real world appeared shaded because a barrier 4 3/8 inches separated the real world from the bubble. The barrier's width never varied. Additionally, the real world moved slower than the movement inside the bubble by a ratio of 4 to 1. Movement of matter within the world could pass through the bubble. My doctor tells me to cut out these cigars at my age, and so does my wife, but she's back in Florida and can't bug me about it. And ascending laughter swept the room. So in other words, if 10 minutes passed inside the bubble, 40 minutes would have gone by outside. That never changes either. It's called the retrograde constant. How's the bubble know where to go? A difficult chore, Mike. Depends on the power levels. It isn't like starting an engine. You're talking about billions of quantum particles all aligned correctly. He hasn't fine-tuned his operation, or at least he hasn't fine-tuned it properly. And what about time itself? Asked one of McCabe's aides. Mankiewicz puffed on the cigar for some time. The problem with time is some people say it's like a butterfly, and you change something and the probability of change expands exponentially. You don't think that, Ray? Asked McCabe. Mankiewicz shook his head and chomped on the cigar. I prefer to think humans make choices. I think it's more specific, more localized in its inception. But, and this is, as they say, a big but. They laughed louder this time. That localized change can butterfly out. McCabe stood. It's most unfortunate Dr. Moon became a renegade. I concur with that, Mike. Make no mistake about it. Dr. Moon is brilliant, but flawed. And if someone decides to use his brilliance for his own demented ends, well, then anything can happen. McCabe already had the binoculars raised as he scanned the bay near the balcony railing. He turned when he saw Mankiewicz. They'll be taking a private boat to Centauri Island, Ray. Hard to believe they built this all under the harbor. I've been around too long to discount anything, Mike, he said, turning to the soldier to his right. McCabe let the binoculars dangle around his neck. I never received more information about Hugo Feldman. Feldman operated a triangle between Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, and Paris. His last meeting in the U.S. coincided with the theft of coil conductors from Centron Corporation in Wyford, Maryland. Centron? It's affiliated with my college, Barton College, said Mankiewicz. McCabe looked through the binoculars again. This retrograde component now has humanity on the brink of unfathomable change. Patch probably knows more than I do about retrograde, Mike. The whole thing is scary. And Kennedy's death resulted from Patch being sent back in time. McCabe set down the glasses again. Now wait a minute, Ray. Cities have been nuked in the other timeline, and you were under attack by Carlos Sanchez and the terrorists. I understand all that, but still, Mike, he looked into Mankiewicz's eyes. What's done is done, Ray. What we need to do now is make sure the Chinese don't manipulate Captain Kincaid back in time. We get the complex information into our computers. Let the captain fix the retrograde and then shut the damn place down. I haven't seen Patch in 6 years. McCabe inhaled as he focused the binoculars. Danforth, Moon, Captain Kincaid are boarding the boat right now. He handed the glasses to Mankiewicz. Then he pointed back at the skyscrapers. The boat is called the Tempest Aetas Rerum. McCabe lifted his tablet from a backpack. A colorful map with the blue harbor appeared on the screen. He pointed at the northern part of the island, marked in bold, red Chinese letters. What the hell is that? It's called the Point of No Return Chateau. There are scant records on the site. Well, hell, the Chinese aren't going to let that out. And Moon thinks he's operating with impunity since he's under the auspices of the Chinese government. McCabe zoomed closer on his tablet. Actual streets formed in a satellite view. Everything will end up with Homeland Security. Homeland Security? Barked Mankiewicz. The technology is dangerous. I would think if they'd read my reports about changing history, they'd realize that. Okay. Mankiewicz did not really believe what he had just told McCabe. He wanted Patch back in 1963. By the way, what is the name of that boat? You mean the Tempest Aetas Rerum? Yes. It means time, devourer of all things. I rest my case. In his fatigues, McCabe assumed a formal stance in the makeshift conference room back in the apartment. He studied the live harbor video on the huge flat screen. The Tempest Aetas Rerum moving at a steady pace in the water near the harbor island. McCabe moved up to the wood grain platform. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This secure briefing via satellite will outline our objectives in Operation Time Portal Alpha. Mankiewicz, his arm folded, followed the wavy image of the white yacht chugging past the other boats in the gray harbor. McCabe clicked his remote. A full schematic of the complex in blue and red filled the wide screen. From the harbor island, a central connector looking more like an oil well shaft extended straight down from the temple. The complex itself balloons out onto the harbor like an inverted water tower into the basalt. It's within the basalt that they carved out the complex over 20 years. The Chinese government has made a huge investment in Dr. Moon and his project stolen from Professor Mankiewicz's work. The entire dilation ring extends some 25 kilometers in diameter. The top of the dome, housing the power-up components, is some 200 meters below the sea bottom. Incredible, said Mankiewicz. Our underwater drones are now fully operational. We had the capacity to control their computers from above the complex in the harbor. Our first objective was to have Captain Kincaid properly align the retrograde parameters. We will simply let that evolve. Then we will strip the information and shut down the complex. McCabe switched the screen back to the harbor. Captain Kincaid is on the Tempest Edicts Rerum and sailing toward the temple entrance to the subterranean complex. Now, each of you has on your tablets the present positions of all Chinese troops in the harbor and on the island and in the complex. We will monitor Captain Kincaid's progress and see what the Chinese are up to. We have other underwater drones surrounding the island. In case of emergency, we can flood the shaft and destroy the facility. I will now have Commander Pilsner of the 7th Fleet brief you on drone deployment and just how we're going to control the complex's computers. On Minkowitz's tablet was a readout from the Los Angeles Dodgers from 1963. On July 25th, 1963, the Pirates beat the Dodgers 4-3. Koufax lost. In attendance at the game, in a black and white photo, was Las Vegas's frontman, handsome Johnny Rosselli, and his associates. He needed to get Patch back through time to this man they had met in 1961. That meant cunningly tricking McCabe. As McCabe left the podium, Minkowitz quickly switched his laptop screen back to a harbor image of the Tempest Edicts Rerum. "What are the odds of pulling this off, Mike?" he asked quickly as the short-haired Pilsner came on the screen. 100%. We will gain, with your help, Ray, the dilation and retrograde technology. Then it will be placed at a secure databank where no one can ever have access to it again.